Hey everyone, Ariel Adams here with Superlative. Please listen to the other aBlogtoWatch podcast, aBlogtoWatch Weekly, where we talk about the latest watch news and reviews. Today on Superlative, my guest is Hamza Masood. He is the Business Development Manager of WatchCharts. Hamza, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Ariel. Nice to finally meet you in person, or virtually at least, but...
Yeah, we're looking at each other.
Yes.
You have a lot of sort of little projects you do in the watch space. We'll get into that a little bit, but I wanted to remind people that the last time we talked about WatchCharts was with the other member of the team, Charles Tian, and that was back in 2022. So I think that was more around when you launched, actually, and we talked about what you're trying to do. Sorry, you want to say?
Oh, I was just going to mention the company was founded in 2019, but I think that was because it was late in 2022, and so the market had started experiencing a correction, and it was just a hot topic around that time.
Okay, yeah. So let's get the bigger context here. 2019 is when WatchCharts come out. And WatchCharts, as the name implies, is supposed to be, we'll call it a data company. And the idea is to create information to track what's going on in the watch industry. And there's multiple things that can mean. That can mean the performance of the business, the watch industry itself. It could also mean how demand and prices are changing for both new and used watches. And realistically speaking, all of these things matter for the health of the watch industry. Ever since I've been covering the watch industry, now about 18 years ago, I have found that the available, we'll call them formal statistics that would allow people to understand how this industry is doing are elusive. There are some numbers here and there which are available, and there's been a boutique cottage industry since the 1990s of small companies that have sought to track what's going on in the industry. And this information for much of the lifespan, again, Hamza, thank you for listening to this whole introduction. I just want people to sort of hear the context. Much of this data was really for watch brands, what are retailers selling, what's the sellout, what's going on. That's been the source of a lot of the data. But brands keep performance data internal. Real sell-through and what's actually going on in the market tends to be private information. It's not available. And so I think people sometimes become accustomed to the fact that data is available, therefore there's good metrics around it. But even the US government or other governments, when trying to figure out what's going on in the economy, they have to sort of artistically choose signals, if you will, to help them suggest things. So if you sort of get into the murky data side of economics, you can realize how fragile and maybe fantasy-like some of these conclusions are. But I guess that's where I want to sort of start with the question is, what's it been like over the last couple of years when it comes to just getting good data that allows you to do the reports that you do? Right.
So I think the data collection problem is definitely one of the more challenging ones in the space in which we operate, because you don't want to find yourself in a situation where you're basically just garbage in, garbage out. So we can
GIGO, my favorite acronym.
We could, just collect a bunch of nonsense information and then just package it up, and it's like lipstick on a pig or whatever metaphor you want to use to describe what that situation would look like.
And there's a lot of that out there. That's like most reports, okay?
Yeah, I think for us, fundamentally, the lens through which we look at the data collection problem is that of being collectors ourselves. So that's what motivates us. The company mission is to drive transparency into the secondary market. So, you mentioned sort of in that introduction a little bit about how data collection for the primary market has been a challenge, certainly for consumers, even though brands may have had access to information about it. We're sort of a little bit further downstream of that, where in the secondary market, what we're trying to do is say, if you're after a particular watch, it may be listed in 5, 10, 15 different places. Why do the prices vary between each of those platforms? By how much do they vary? And then how do those variances trend over time? And then how can I use that information to make a more informed decision as a collector about what I want to buy? I think the secondary market also historically was one that, had a little bit of a stigma around it because of its associations with the gray market. So we can get into that, but I think of the gray market as different from the secondary market. But as long as there have been watches, there have been collectors, and as long as there have been collectors, there's been a secondary market.
Secondary market would basically mean a used watch in the purest sense, and gray market would be a new watch, but that needs to be sold at a discount because for whatever reason it wasn't sold at full price.
Or if it's a super hyped watch, it's being flipped for a profit.
Oh, so that's more the modern definition.
It's both. It's both.
I have to say, I don't like calling that the gray market. You're right, it technically is, but here's why I distinguish it. The person who buys a watch at a discount versus one at a markup, I think those are totally different people.
Yes.
Right.
I think. They can be the same person depending on the watch. So, the same person might be interested in, let's say, a mid 2000s titanium Panerai as well as a modern Rolex Daytona, but just can't get one from their AD.
It's not that they're not. I agree that the same person can be interested, but and again, I could be wrong, but my experience tells me that buyers have very specific types of ways they like to buy. Once someone gets into a discount mode, it's very difficult to get them out of it, right? Mm-hmm. You just sort of become accustomed to that. So the idea of spending more than retail, maybe they'll spend retail on a few select things, but spending more than retail when they've trained themselves to look for deals, I'm not saying it can never happen. I just think that it bucks the trend.
Yes, I think the number of watches for which people will be willing to pay premiums, certainly over the long term, it has been the case that there are very, very few watches for which that is true. The Daytona, for example, even, anecdotally going back to the 90s was a waitlist watch. But the GMT Master, for example, wasn't, but now it is. And it does sell at a premium for current production references and even for older references on the secondary market. But will that trend persist beyond the current hype cycle that has been on a downward trend the last 2 to 3 years? Time will tell, but the historical record certainly suggests that the natural level for those prices to settle at is going to be below retail. But just to come back to your question about how do we think about the data collection problem? So I will keep sort of maybe depending on how far you want to dig into this, keep referring back to some information that we do publish on our website about what our pricing methodology is. So I would definitely encourage everyone to go check that out. But we try to collect information from publicly available data sources. So we're not looking at private Facebook groups or WhatsApp chats or anything like that.
Boy, I wish you could, right?
Yes and no, because I think it depends on what the problem is you're trying to solve. For us, the primary sort of variable that we want to track for is pricing. And there we found that adding more than a certain number of sources, the benefit of actually adding one additional source is marginal, because it's not the case that the spread on, let's say, again, a Daytona, a 126500 is going to be, $10,000. It's just not. It doesn't matter whether you track the price for that watch from 5 sources or 10 or 20 or 200. At some point, the marginal benefit of adding an additional source of data is going to be, just limited.
I got to ask you about this. I know this is going to get hyper niche here, but I've always been curious about this because this is so crucial to the data and it being meaningful. Mm-hmm. So you talk about the online published price of a couple of watches.
Yes.
Now, here's what I think is important to understand. First of all, when you are a seller, you can choose what any price you want. Yes, mm-hmm. you want it to sell, but people don't realize there's no police out there. If you want to charge $100,000 for a watch that should cost $10,000, nothing is stopping you from publishing that price, right?
I haven't checked in a few months, but there might still be 116500 Daytonas on Chrono24 listed for $50,000.
Okay, so you have this phenomenon, and that's out there. And if you're an unsophisticated buyer, that might be confusing to you because again, people can publish anything they want at any price. That's sort of some weird extension of freedom of speech. So the issue is that when you price something, you want it to sell, and then you're judging it based upon what other people are doing. So it's sort of this weird cycle where you're really not sure what the market is when it comes to stuff like that. Because people, I call it ambitious pricing. They hope that mm-hmm. somebody is going to buy that amount. It's not actually a reasonable amount. My experience going to trade shows and things like that for many years, you ask a price. When you're quoted a price, that price is based upon the then current cutting edge competitive price. Like those dealers know stuff. Yet the experience online, you can't trust the retailer or the dealer, whatever, to put a price which is, a good one. They're just trying to hope they can get away with stuff. And so I guess my question is, how do you contend with the fact that there are some people who are trying to say, I just want to price this is what I think it'll sell, what's in the consumer's mind. And then these other folks who are like, maybe there's somebody dumb enough to come along and see this and buy it, which again is a common practice. So from a data collection perspective, how do you deal with this extremely, I'll call it a laissez-faire nature when it comes to pricing practices?
I think that's more of a consumer education challenge, which is precisely why a tool like WatchCharts exists. That is the reason we created it, because we want people to feel like they are buying and selling with confidence. And it's not just, by the way, on the buy side, it's also on the sell side. So
sure,
if you're listing a watch that you no longer want in your collection, then you should be able to list with confidence and make as much money off of it as the market is willing to pay for it.
It's a hard thing, right? It's not. It's an art as much of a science.
Yeah, and ultimately, I think it's a free market. Like you said, everybody is willing to charge whatever they want for a watch, and everybody is willing to is open to pay for a watch what they want, and supply and demand will at some point equalize. And if there are not enough buyers for a given watch, then the prices for those watches will start to drop because that is the pressure that the lack of sales activity will create on the part of buyers, on the part of sellers. And then suddenly, as more people become more attracted to those watches at slightly lower prices, maybe the demand or increase in demand will then cause, prices to start rising again, or at least stabilize in the short term. So in that sense, it's a very sort of straightforward supply and demand based dynamic. It really, as a consumer, what you should do is do your homework. Don't just buy the first watch that you see that's listed at a given price, or the first price that someone is offering you in person. Do your research. Look at actual listings that we can show in some cases as having sold, for example, on Reddit, that also reflect the difference between a dealer price and a private party price, which is like a P2P, like you're buying and selling between collectors. So yes, I mean, dealers offer services, authentication, certification, a certain customer experience, and so they can sometimes charge premiums, which would make the price that you'll pay with them be higher than what you would pay on a platform like the WatchCharts marketplace or on Reddit Watch Exchange or Rolex forums or what have you. But at least by doing your homework, you can understand a little bit more why the price is what it is.
So first of all, I think what you're saying is very sobering and wise advice, and there's really nothing I can say in disagreement, but I do want to add two elements that I think at least create some context around it. One, I think that it's very easy to tell people that, buyer beware, you have to do your homework first. But the whole point of these tools is because not everyone knows how to do that. And the time required is sometimes unreasonable. For example, you need to do a transaction this week. But in reality, to quote, do your homework takes 6 months. You can't rush 6 months. So you have to either take a risk or trust someone. And that's ostensibly why WatchCharts, right, exists. And then the second thing I want to say is I would have agreed with you in terms of the fact that economically speaking, that tends to be what happens. But I personally saw a very big exception to what you said. And this is in sort of the last days of the healthy side of the Hong Kong market, right? Hong Kong is a depressed market now, obviously will always still be an important place, but it's not what it used to be. And for many years, if you went to Hong Kong to buy watches, it was a great place for, we'll call it gray market, because there was all these unsold watches from many places, sometimes several years old, that you could buy at a discount because, as you said, in terms of supply and demand, not a lot of demand, and they're happy to sell at sort of any price. So you could go there and you could oftentimes negotiate the best price in the world, if not the advertised price was the best price in the world for this watch. So that followed the traditional economic model you're talking about. But you know what, Hamza? I noticed something really weird happening at one point. One of the last times I was in Hong Kong, it's been a while since I've been there, I noticed that these same stores started developing an entire new strategy. And the new strategy was based not on something that was happening in Hong Kong, but things that they were noticing in the watch world online. They were noticing, certain old Rolexes and things like that going for high prices at auctions and things like that. And so these exact same watches that maybe a few months earlier were sold at a discount, now were being sold at a premium. And a brand new statement was coming out of their mouths when asked, well, why is it so expensive? And they say, no longer made. I remember they would just say, no longer made. And we actually have a series on aBlogtoWatch called No Longer Made. It wasn't from that, but I just think that's funny. And that was their excuse. They were trying to opportunistically see if that argument helped sell the watch at a premium. Exact same item, exact same economic situation. They didn't have any higher buy-in for that product. Now they're trying to get away with selling it at a markup. And I don't think they're doing it anymore, at least not to the degree. But I found it fascinating that they would reject this traditional idea that, you're going to sell at a discount because you bought it at a discount, right?
Yep.
And you can be competitive by shaving your margins, to this sort of fishing model where we're not going to sell it unless somebody wants to spend this high price that we think we're excited about. And that just flies in the face of the traditional economic model where we know that people want to get rid of inventory they have and therefore will sell it at an increasing discount so that they can make space for new inventory. This says, no, just sit on it and wait, and some chump will come along and spend too much money on it. It blew my mind, but I saw it happening time and time again. So that's an interesting wrinkle, isn't it?
It is. I think it depends on how much of a market, in some sense, as a dealer, you are able to go out and create for the products that you're selling. If we look at just the trend of the last 2 to 3 years, where smaller watches, a lot of vintage Cartier, neo-vintage Cartier references have suddenly become like the hot thing, which wasn't the case like 5 years ago. You see that impacting the prices for that category of watches. Or, for example, my friends from my local collector group who are vintage Universal Genève collectors, bemoaning the fact that all of the publicity around Universal Genève's relaunch is causing prices for vintage stock to appreciate, because suddenly there's a lot more interest in the market. So I think what you're describing really is no different from any of those trends where if you have a voice and a megaphone and you use it, and you can use it to go out and create hype for certain types of watches, then there will be definitely increased demand for that kind of product. And, if the supply is there, if it's on the secondary market, then sellers will be able to charge whatever, they can get away with. If it's on the primary market, you'll end up with wait lists. I mean, I remember when in 2018, the Black Bay 58 came out, it was, a watch media darling. Like, everybody was like, oh my God, this is like the greatest thing since sliced bread. And, I remember I was traveling with family in Europe at the time. In 3 different countries, I tried to see if I could get one, and I couldn't. And then I came back to the US, and I asked my AD for one, and I had to wait 4 months, right? Okay. And the Black Bay 58 today on the secondary market trades at something like a 50% discount.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's freely available at retail. But that's also because the Black Bay 58 is no longer where the center of gravity of the attention of the watch world resides anymore, right? Like, it's not that people aren't interested in tool watches anymore, or dive watches anymore, or not interested in Tudor anymore. Each of those things it still exists, but the hype around, or the attention around the topic of conversation around watches has moved on to other topics. And then for those classes of watch, you see similar sorts of supply and demand dynamics, start to affect pricing. And we'll see the same thing now, again, going back to the UG example, we'll see it with Galet, where all of a sudden, because Galet is about to be revived, there will be a revival of interest in vintage Galet watches. So what you're describing to me really is just that sort of longer term cycle of things coming things sort of coming in and out of what's trendy. And then because that's where the casual buyer is, and, in aggregate, that's where a lot of demand will suddenly get generated, dealers are able to charge more. What you're describing, for example, was probably true for bubblebacks in the mid-2010s, Rolex bubblebacks, right? Vintage watches. And then after 2017, 2018, has anybody ever spoken about them? Not really. And where are the prices? They've crashed from where they were back then. So it really just, it comes down to can you goose demand? If you can, then even with, and there's not a lot of supply because like you said, these are no longer made. There's a finite amount of supply. So you'll be able to charge more.
Thank you for describing all that. I want to maybe add some context to this behavior because within the watch consumption arena, there's just different types of consumers that try to do different types of things. Now, this leads into the bigger topic that I like to discuss, which I say that this hobby, and it is a hobby, is what I call a social first hobby as opposed to a product first hobby these days. When I first got into this hobby, it was the watch itself. It was the product that interested me. And then it was like, oh, it's nice that other people like this too. I get to chat with them about it. Nowadays, as an adult, it's hard to make friends. I found this hobby, which is inherently very social. It's group-based, and then there's meetups, and then there's, of course, wanting to know what other people's opinions are, and then there's, of course, wanting to show off to them what I like, what I got. And so what I have found is that not for everyone, for a lot of people, the watch hobby's value is in making and maintaining friendships. And part of that, as is built into it, is following the conversation, so to say. And so that's why there's these spikes, these trends, if you will, in popularity. It's not because this particular product is superlative in any way or particularly special. It's just that it's what the community is then talking about. And because most people want to get something or be part of that conversation, there's going to be increased demand because of virtue of it being the topic of conversation. And then when that conversation changes, as it inevitably will, that demand will naturally wane and prices will normalize back to where they were. And the entire exercise oftentimes had nothing more to do than one collector decided this is an area that people haven't been into. Prices are probably low compared to other stuff. They will inflate as attention, moves over there. And then that first opinion leader will say, oh, this market is too crowded now, too much demand around it. I'm going to go find the next thing. So it's this sort of jumping around from unexciting topic to unexciting topic, making it exciting, and then abandoning it. Again, it's part of the social element of the hobby more so than it is a pursuit of a particular watch or a particular quality level or particular history or anything like that. And that, in my opinion, accounts for these little blips and trends. And it's not good or bad news. I just think it's a phenomenon which is happening, right?
Yeah. To sort of give you a personal anecdote, in one of the groups that I'm in, lately there's been interest on neo-vintage Breguet because a lot of people in the group, I think rightly so, consider it criminally undervalued for the quality of the watchmaking on offer at today's market prices.
Criminally undervalued, that's funny.
Yeah, and it's like, if you want a finely finished watch with a guilloche dial and nice casework and a finely finished movement, and you want something, classically styled, then there's obviously a bunch of different, sort of pockets of the overall secondary market where you can find watches with those characteristics. But then once you add the question of, well, what is good value for money, then suddenly, the Venn diagram, sort of the intersection seems to arrive at neo-vintage Breguet. And so that's suddenly what people are talking about.
I'm gonna cut through some of the terminology. It just comes down to Breguet is a company that doesn't advertise enough. Breguet makes a nice product. Therefore, all the unsold, used, or whatever Breguet watches from the last 20 years look cheaper than a lot of the competition because the demand isn't there. But if enough interest coalesces around Breguet, same thing will happen, and some will move on and be like, oh, neo-vintage Gerard Perregaux isn't receiving love. So you're right. Right now, it's a great time to do that. Cartier is having a moment, but for a long time, same thing. Neo-vintage, basically, modern, unsold, or the last 20 years or so. Tons of it. Tons of used Cartier. It was you get it for nothing. Now it's a little bit different, but that had its moment. So it's sort of this bouncing around for where is there low demand. Saying things like criminally undervalued, I'm amused because the reality is so much of this stuff is either criminally undervalued or overvalued, depending on who you ask. But the reality is that not everyone in the community can be hunting on eBay all day long to notice these trends. So it's sort of a few key data nerds that sort of tell everyone else, hey, everyone, this isn't demand. And then after a few months, it does become a demand. And then you have the people that buy up the stock and then try to resell it for higher, and all these practices that I think ruin the hobby. But this is sort of what goes on and how some of these trends begin, right?
Absolutely.
So let's go back to the WatchCharts website. Explain again, it's now a few more years into it and website purposes evolve. What would you say is the primary purpose of the WatchCharts website right now? Who is it for, and what do you want people doing with it?
The fundamental purpose really goes back to the mission. It's price transparency for collectors, primarily. If we are doing anything, that is what we are trying to do. We are collectors ourselves, and Charles founded the company because it literally started as a spreadsheet, because he was trying to sort of see if he could identify watches that offered good value for money, because he was very early in his sort of like collecting journey, and he was trying to see what he could find that was undervalued on the market. And so he started keeping track of prices of a handful of references on a spreadsheet, and then realized, okay, well, if I'm doing this, then maybe I can like do it in a more systematic way. All of us come from technical backgrounds. I spent the majority of my career working in big tech before I joined WatchCharts. It's now been almost 3.5 years. Charles similarly was working for a big tech company in Austin, and the problem we are trying to solve is the problem that we faced as collectors ourselves, which is I want to buy something and it's listed for X. Is X a good price? Or I've had this watch for 2 or 3 years. I don't wear it anymore. I want to sell it so I can buy something else that I like more now. What should I sell it for, right? And that question of what do I buy something for and what should I sell something for is fundamentally what we are trying to answer. And the way that we answer that is we collect data from publicly available sources. We clean it up, aggregate it, remove outliers, things like that. There's a whole bunch of things that goes into the data pipeline. And then we every time we track something being sold, it becomes an input to our pricing methodology. And then we spit out a market price for now over 27,000 watches, which are all updated daily. There's nothing special within that pipeline that we do differently for Rolex from Seiko, for example. Every brand is treated equally. There's really like no special treatment in that sense that we say, okay, like for Rolex, we have to do this like weird thing, whereas for Seiko, we have to do something else, which is different from what we have to do from Patek, for Patek. We collect all of the data we can find. When we track stuff selling or we infer that it's sold, that becomes an input to the pricing methodology. It becomes one more data point for us to use to update the market price. And then that's published as a 30-day moving average and updated daily. So if you want to buy, let's say, a 5-digit no-date sub, a 16610, right? A 14060. I got my references mixed up. A 14060, search up the reference. You'll get today's market price. You'll get, on the free version of the website, a 1-year price history. And then if you want to become a paying subscriber, you'll have access to more than that, historical data. You'll see we'll tell you how many listings we've tracked. We'll tell you what the volatility for the price for that watch is. We'll tell you, sort of what the regional pricing is, how much more or less you can expect to pay depending on whether or not the watch comes with box and papers, its condition, if you're buying from a dealer or from a private party. And then for each of those sort of parameters, we can differentiate what the price should be so that you as a consumer, let's say, again, me in North America want to buy a 14060 with box and papers in pre-owned condition. What should I pay, right? We'll answer that question. And then we'll do that, like I said, for over 27,000 watches.
Thank you. You mentioned that in the beginning there that part of the original mission was to help underappreciated watches get more attention. What part of the website do you use to sort of figure out where those underappreciated watches are and how to learn about them?
Yeah, so we have a very powerful screener functionality under the watch values page. And
screener, okay.
Yeah. So if you just see on the website in the header bar, there's a tab called Watch Values. Okay. If you click on that, it'll launch you into like the discovery experience. And so what you can do is you can say, show me chronographs under 38 millimeters in steel, with market prices, below 10,000, for which the price has appreciated by less than 10% in the last 5 years.
Well, it is a very robust filtering system. I think that it requires maybe a little, 8-week weekend course to learn how to do the searches. But it is, you're right. I'm looking in here. There's more parameters than I would have guessed exist. That is quite robust.
Yeah. So, that really, I think, is because I think, I mean, and you probably, I mean, you're a watch collector yourself. You're a watch enthusiast. You're probably that before you're, somebody who writes about them and covers them for a living. Even if this is not what you were doing for a living, you would definitely still be interested in watches. You can appreciate that collectors are very particular about the kinds of things they want to search for. So I think this experience, the way we've built it, lets you really sort of like narrow in on, maybe I do want to look at like, neo-vintage chronographs from Breguet, Blancpain, I don't know, like take a pick of a couple of other watch brands, and then see like what are the references that they've made. Or let's say I want to look for a perpetual calendar under $15,000 in a precious metal, right? Is there something like that on the market?
This is that homework you were talking about. You said you got to do your homework. This is what you meant.
Exactly.
Database work.
Yes. So I think the work that we have done is to enable you to answer those sorts of questions for yourself. I will occasionally, I mean, the perpetual calendar example that I gave you is one that I personally was looking at recently because I was like, I wasn't looking under 15,000. I just used that as an example. It's obviously arbitrary. I was using a different like sort of price threshold. But the point is, there's so much out there that would meet your criteria for what you're looking for, that if it's not modern and therefore like ultra hyped, would be very good value for money. There's Patek perpetual calendars in precious metal cases under $50,000, for example, under $30,000, right?
Sure.
In some cases. And if that's really all you care about, like I want to be able to say, I'm wearing a perpetual calendar from what I consider to be the greatest brand of all time, and it's gold, so it looks shiny on my wrist. Run the filters and we'll tell you what the market price is, and then you can go look up listings and hopefully find the perfect watch for you at that point in time. And then
So thank you. That helps explain to people how to use some of the search tools. I still think, as you said, you need to know what you're looking for. I think that there's a consumer out there, or even a mode that many consumers are in, where they like to browse more, and it's not necessarily about what. My question is there a way of determining a watch's interest based upon the percentage off of original retail price? Meaning, are you able to track relatively consistent original retail price and then maybe allow you to filter that way? Because I know a lot of people, they're like, where are the biggest discounts? And that would seem like an easy way of calculating discount is the listed price compared to the retail price. For a 50-year-old watch, that doesn't make sense. But for a 20-year-old watch, it starts to.
Yes. So the first sort of way that we try and address that is for every watch for which we can find that data, even if it's been discontinued for 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, we'll publish the retail price. And we'll tell you how recently we've identified what that retail price is. So again, for a 5-digit sub, that's probably not going to be more recent than, late 2000s, for example, because that's roughly when everything that was 5-digit went out of production.
Right.
How useful it is to compare the retail price of a watch that's been out of production for 15 years to its market price today, I don't know how useful that is. Certainly, if let's say, again, to go back to the example of a 14060, those used to retail for around, you probably know this better than me, somewhere between the $3,000 to $5,000 range, but that watch trades around $7,000 to $8,000 today, right? So yes, it technically is trading above retail, but it trades below the retail price of a current sub. It trades below the retail price of a current generation sub, even the previous generation 6-digit sub. So even, within the generations of the Rolex Submariner family, like you'll see this tiering of prices. But then more specifically for in-production watches, which is a very, very clearly defined set.
Sure.
What we will publish is value retention numbers on the website. So under the top performers tab, if you scroll down, you'll be able to see every brand for which we track the current production status of the entire catalog. And then we'll give you on a per reference basis how much of a premium or discount that watch trades for on the secondary market.
It's a cool thing that you have here on the website. You estimate if a model is currently being produced. How do you know that?
We base it off of monitoring the brand's website. So if Rolex, for example, is producing something, then they'll say on their website, here's the watch. But if they're not, then you won't be able to see it there anymore.
Okay, but that's going to change based upon brand, and some brands you're just not going to get that. So I think what I want to impress to people is that it's all nice and good to have this beautiful interface and these tools, but at the end of the day, it really comes back to the available data. As you said, you're looking at publicly available data, which is there. I guess my next question, if there was private data that you could get access to, what data would that be? And make a pitch to those people why they should make such data available to you, if there should be some exchange maybe. But I'd like to hear where does your dream data come from?
Yeah. Okay. So it's funny that you asked that question, because we were discussing that just last week in the team. And it's not immediately obvious what the value add for private data, in the sense that like we're looking at prices, for example, from a WhatsApp group chat would be. And there's a number of reasons why that's the case. One, generally these groups will have very few people. They will only ever talk about very, very few watches. And therefore, they will only ever have visibility into a very, very narrow slice of the watch market. We're looking at collecting thousands of listings for, let's say, the top 1,000 watches on the market by popularity, if you go by transaction volume, right? Getting access to 5 additional, let's say 10 to 20 additional data points from a private data source for that watch over the course of a year does not fundamentally move the needle for us as far as the data collection problem itself is concerned. That's why, and then of course the other way to sort of approach that is to say, do you think there is something missing from the market prices that we're publishing, and would collecting private data make those prices better? So the first thing you really need to assess in responding to that question is whether or not the prices as they're published today seem sensible or not. And for us, anytime somebody asks us like, why should we trust your prices? Like the answer is, go look at the price of a given watch on the website and see if it passes your sniff test. And if it does, then, yes, we'll give you, a certain amount of visibility into how we're collecting the data and putting it together and putting it out there. But ultimately, it has to pass the smell test, and it should sort of line up with what you can see based on some of the listings that we'll show you, where watches are actually transacting for the prices that we say. Or that you may have access to just based on your own research, or if you're in the industry, which is generally where we tend to get this question, right? People have some sort of insider knowledge. So it's a long sort of way of coming back to the short version of the answer, which is I don't know necessarily that adding private data from a particular source is going to be that valuable. Certainly not in the way that we are trying to address the price transparency problem.
How important is Rolex to all of this? A huge amount of the interest when it comes to tracking watch prices has to do with Rolex, not just Rolex. a huge number of the watches featured on the website of Rolex. I'm just wondering, in terms of this whole price tracking, all this stuff, how much of this is interest consolidated around one brand with sort of a little bit of a fringe, or is it actually more well distributed than I'm guessing?
Like I said earlier, there's nothing that we are doing specifically for Rolex on the secondary market that is different from what we do for any other brand.
From a data perspective.
From a data perspective. And so in that sense, like, you're not seeing a bunch of Rolexes on the market because that's the only watches that, we collect data for.
Sure.
They are as visible as they are because they are the most popular watches on the market. The precise numbers escape me, but it's easily like one of the largest, both by volume as well as value brands on the primary market, as well as on the secondary market, where the effect is even more pronounced because the general perception is that a Rolex will hold its value better than pretty much any other brand out there. They are so well made for what they are, for the amount of money that Rolex asks you to pay for them, that I think I heard Eric Koo describe it in these terms recently, where it's like, it's so liquid that it's essentially equivalent to cash. Which I think even the data would point out, like if you look at days on market, for example, which is the metric we use to calculate how long does it take a watch between when it's listed and when it's sold. As a general trend, the days on market numbers for Rolex references will be far lower than they will be for most other brands, if not all other brands. And that's because they are highly desired. And that's where the center of gravity of attention, no matter what else is going on in the market, year after year, decade after decade, seems to certainly reside in the last, let's say, 2 to 3 decades. Maybe before that, Rolex wasn't quite the behemoth it is today, but I think what you see on our website is just a reflection of the realities on the ground, which is that they are more desired than anyone else's watches. They sell more than anyone else's watches.
Thank you for the information, Hamza. I think that one of the things that occurs to me is that I'm not saying it's a different person all the time, but the mentality around being concerned with the resale price of a watch when buying one versus being less concerned about the resale price of the watch can vary, right? Like not every time someone goes to buy a watch, they're specifically concerned about what can I resell it for. Sometimes, yes, and some buyers every single time. But other buyers are like, well, this is disposable income. I lose money on my luxury purchases all the time. I don't care. I want to get something fun and distinctive. And so I think it's just important to say that this is very useful as a tool for many buyers, but it is not exclusively how people go ahead and try to decide what to buy. Many instances, people are like, you know what? I want to spend about $5,000. I'm going to see the best that I can get for $5,000. That's my limit. I'm prepared to lose that money forever. I just want to have something cool that hopefully I'll enjoy. And that is a still very relevant, but albeit quite different buying behavior than I want to make sure that this watch is going to be sellable in 5 years or 2 years or 1 year if I need it.
Yeah, I mean, it's again, to share a personal anecdote, which I think is which I find highly amusing, is that even with access to all of this data, all of our team, like everyone on the team, buys the watches that we like. We're not looking at the data and saying, oh, this watch has immense value retention or value appreciation potential. And so if I buy this in 3 years, I'll be able to sell it for more. And so this is where I should park my money. And I can make this decision because I have access to this information. No, the brand that I buy watches from most frequently is Grand Seiko, which relative to Rolex does not have great value retention. Even the Rolex references that Charles has purchased have all been the ones that have lost market value. And then another one of our teammates, for example, is interested in neo vintage Omega, and he has a Hublot, which I don't understand why he likes it, but that's what he wanted to spend his money on. And the point of sharing the anecdote is to say that what we are offering to the collector or to the enthusiast is a tool that did not exist, let's say 10 years ago, where we are not telling you what to buy. We are not telling you why to buy it, other than to say, if this watch is what you're interested in and at this price, then at least you have the information to make that buying decision with confidence, that you're not overpaying, or if you're selling, that you're not, selling at a price that's less than what you could have gotten for it.
Yeah, I'll say this. It's sort of both a plus side and also a potential dangerous point. The plus side is that, as you described, you can use WatchCharts as a way of finding underappreciated watches. If you use the tools correctly, you sort of know what you're looking for, use the price parameters, you can find deals out there that exist because these are lower demand watches. I think the danger, especially for the novices to collecting and to buying watches, is all this, we'll call it stock market-like information about brand popularity and pricing and things like that, can maybe confuse you that this is an important part of the buying process, is to be concerned about this. And the reality is, this is interesting information and it can be used in different ways. But when people buy watches, they shouldn't be preoccupied with, the pricing and stuff like that. It's, more what you can afford and what will make you happy. So I want it to be taken into context, especially for the new collectors and the people fresh to the hobby, but also advocate for the fact that you can use a tool like this, not just to be preoccupied with prices, but also to find good values and lower demand stuff.
Absolutely. I would 100% agree with that. And it's the sort of tool, to go back, I feel like I'm beating a dead horse, but is the sort of tool that when I was a new collector, I wish I had, because I may have made, in retrospect, I can say I may have made some of my collecting decisions differently. So
I want to go back to a statement that you said in our preamble conversation to this, and you said that I thought it was an interesting statement. I want to hear more about it. The watch consumer has the media they deserve.
Yes.
I think that's what you said. Explain that. Unpack that for me.
Yeah. So this is completely unrelated to everything that we were talking about with WatchCharts. This is more sort of like a
new topic.
Yeah, new topic. This is more of a personal opinion than like a company statement or whatever. So
sure.
With that caveat, I think that what I mean when I say that is that having now been a collector myself for coming up on a decade, I've seen obviously the evolution of watch media online and then also to some extent in print over that period of time in terms of how they talk about watches. Well, when I say they, I guess I technically also include you. How you talk about watches, the quality of the coverage, the nature of the topics that the media chooses to focus on, and the way in which that information is packaged and made ready for consumption, either in the written form or now in the form of these sorts of podcasts, which started out being purely audio and now they're also video, or even the evolution that industry events have gone through, where even Watches and Wonders is now trying increasingly to be more and consumer friendly in terms of its presentation. I think some of those changes over time have been positive, some have been negative, but I think one of the biggest criticisms for watch media as a general sort of observation over the last decade has been that if their fundamental responsibility was to educate the consumer about what the product is that watch companies are making and selling, that they have fallen short of meeting that goal. And there's a number of reasons why that is, but they have. And the unfortunate reality is that there is not enough of a pressure from collectors, enthusiasts, consumers of the luxury watch industry for them to be pushed to do a better job. And because that pressure does not exist, until that changes, we can't expect, the watch media to just sort of like not respond to some kind of pressure coming from its, base of users or consumers. So that's really what I mean when I say like we have the watch media we deserve, because we don't demand anything better.
And you believe that if consumers demanded it, that they would get what they asked for?
I think so. I think that a reasonable comparison might be to the state of media for the auto industry, for example, right? Where I think, again, there's all sorts of differences between watches and cars. Like cars have intrinsic value, watches don't. Cars can kill people, watches can't. And so in that sense, they're not, existentially critical to the human condition. Cars are necessities. Luxury watches, by and large, are luxury goods that nobody needs. But notwithstanding all of those caveats, I think the average car consumer demands a lot more information about the car that they want to buy than the average watch consumer does. And maybe that will always be the case, which is why maybe this is just an unfortunate reality that we have to sort of live with. But it's not, at least to me at this point, obvious that that is the case.
Let me respond to that, being, I guess, the veteran of the watch media side. And I want to respond because I think there's areas to clarify what I call responsibility. I don't disclaim the status quo or disagree with the status quo. I think that it's important to recognize that there could be a lot more that watch media provides to the public, and that there's, this is, I think, something I learned a long time ago. The expectations of your average watch collector are very high. They're intelligent people who are spending a lot of money, therefore they're going to be demanding in terms of the information they get. They tend to invest a lot of themselves into this. There's just a general high level of expectation, more so than many, many other categories. And if you look at specialist media print publications, very few historically, even on cars, have been so detailed as to satisfy what watch consumers would want in terms of their ability to have really sharp analysis, even reading car reviews and things like that. So I would say that on the one hand, the expectations of sort of elevated consumers and collectors such as yourself necessitates a professional class of watch journalist who's able to invest their life into learning this stuff and being able to share it. The issue is that no matter how much the consumer demands it, those professionals will not exist if they can't make a living at it. Mm-hmm. And consumers have overwhelmingly said, we don't really want to pay for content. Yep. We'll do so begrudgingly. We don't even want to, we want you, watch media, to figure out how to fund yourself otherwise. And on the watch industry side, I would argue that's actually where the more correct statement is the watch industry has the media it deserves, right? Consumers deserve more because they're the ones funding it. And so I would shift the responsibility not to the consumer, but back to the industry, who can make a decision. We want stronger watch media because that will create more watch lovers and therefore more sales in general. So I wholeheartedly agree, but I shift the responsibility to the industry, not the consumer.
I would just go back to what you just said, which is that consumers are not willing to pay for watch media. And so if you're not willing to pay for a product, how good can you expect its quality really to be at the end of the day?
Well, I think it goes back to the idea that the consumer exclusively funds the industry. So the industry can make it easier for the consumer because all the money comes from them. Much of the industry doesn't want an educated consumer, and we know this. The less information they know, the more susceptible they are to making sales that allow someone to extract a high margin. So traditionally, watch brands have had this very fraught relationship with the collector, because on the one hand, it's the collector's passion that gets people to buy this stuff. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, collectors are finicky and cheap and want increasing attention and decreasing prices and stuff like that. It's hard for brands to make money just selling to them. So it's sort of very strange, tug and pull relationship with the collector, because they need them, but ultimately it's frustrating how much attention and special exceptions they expect.
Yeah. Again, to go back to like sort of my personal, well, I guess I am sticking with my personal take on it. I think my response to what you're sort of identifying the problem to be is to say that I would like to pay for the media that I consume that I think is worth paying for. So maybe this is a question for you. Like, would you consider, for example, creating a subscription tier? Would you consider paywalling aBlogtoWatch?
I have planned to do so at least twice. I have not done so because the aBlogtoWatch team has identified that even though we think we can make a great program, it would be difficult to dedicate enough resources to wait for it to ramp up, because those types of membership communities take a while. We recognize that despite people saying that they want to pay to support places, they don't want to buy content. It's not because content isn't useful, because there's this illusion that there's infinitely available information online for free. And whether or not this is true, it's a very strong allure. So people don't necessarily want to pay for content, they want to pay for other things. And I firmly believed in order to justify how much we needed to charge per month, we could not right now satisfy what that would be. I could have been wrong, but I guess it's feeling that consumers wouldn't want to jump aboard. And a lot of it is subscription fatigue. A lot of it is overall low disposable income. And again, and I think this needs to be a changing mentality, but the majority opinion out there amongst collectors is me spending money on watches is what I feel my contribution to the industry is in this hobby. That for me is enough. I don't really want to spend on events. I don't really want to spend on anything, but of course accessories and things like that. But I feel that by buying that stuff, I'm supporting the industry that should fund the media, that should have the events, that should, bring the watches to my neighborhood so that I can check them out. You might disagree with me, but I believe that this is the prevailing sentiment.
Right. Yeah.
Okay. You agree. So it's a challenge because media, look, aBlogtoWatch is really the last media of its kind. We like you are collectors, and we do what we do thinking of this as for people like us. And it requires, stubborn old me to basically say, no, we're not going to create shill content. No, we're not going to do stuff that just, is flattering towards brands for no better reason than that. Most of the little independent guys that have a YouTube channel or an Instagram channel, they don't have a legal background like me, or that read enthusiast, publications for cars and cameras and computers in the 1990s and sort of saw what, a good model for how to do it. That culture and that monetary incentive doesn't exist. So you're relying on the very few people that come into it with not only good integrity, but the diligence to stick with it. I've had people say, Ariel, you hate money? I'm like, no, I don't hate money. I just like watches and the hobby and my wanting to respect my fellow collector more than just wanting to extract short-term profit. And so it's a complicated thing out there, but I think it's too naive to just say the lazy media, the incentives aren't there. And you're an economist, you understand it's all about incentives.
Absolutely. Yeah. That's where I think maybe where we differ is you're thinking the consumer needs to put pressure on the industry. And what I'm saying is, the consumer should just be willing to pay for content.
They should. I don't disagree. I think you're correct. I think I just am more of a pragmatist, and I look at the statistics of what consumers are likely to do given the context right now. And I believe that we will move towards buying of content. And look, I've talked about this before. I'll bring this topic up again right now. I think what's really standing in the way of people paying for content is the monetary system around it. Nobody wants to read one article and pay a subscription fee. The problem is that we can't do microtransactions. I've been talking about this for more than a decade. If you could go and buy an article for a quarter that answers what you want, you're fine with that. But why do you want to spend $10 a month just to get an answer to your question? Imagine if Google's like, oh, you have questions. Well, pay our subscription fee. You're like, but I just have one question. Why can't I pay you 5 cents for that?
Yeah.
So that's what's missing. I think that when the technology exists for people to be able to do, as I call them, microtransactions, to buy content piecemeal, to answer specific questions they have, that's the game changer. The limitation is the fact that credit card transactions have all these fees. You can't do cheap transactions. So subscriptions are the only thing that are economically viable for all the parties involved, except the consumer. Right? And so I think that that's really the limitation. Now, when there's solutions to that, And the internet, both content producers and people that make content are more comfortable. This is not unprecedented. My understanding is that in China, for example, it's very common within their closed payment systems to have these small transactions with tips or buying little pieces of content. And it's been proven very, very successful. Again, there's things like the credit card companies and financial institutions, which are really standing in the way of this. This isn't a content creator or consumer holdup. This is bigger than that. But just, again, going to what you said, I think that will be a major game changer, because let's say you want to buy that Rolex, that Breguet, and you just want to know about that model and some Breguets. You're willing to spend a few bucks getting information to answer your questions, to catch you up to speed, to do your homework, so to say. But why would you subscribe to something for that when you know that in a few weeks you're going to be onto something else?
Yeah. I mean, just to answer that specific question, like our cheapest plan, which is the enthusiast membership, which, well, first of all, I mean, the website is free to access, but it's only if you use it more than a certain number of times a month that you'll hit a paywall. And if you want to use it beyond that, the cheapest entry point is $20 a month for the enthusiast plan.
Look, data is a different thing. I'm talking about content subscriptions. People are accustomed to the fact that if there's a service behind it, software is a service, people get all that. Again, I did not mean to disparage anyone from subscribing to WatchCharts. Just the general idea that when it comes to subscribe, everything news or whatever, I myself, I pay for some. I pay for The Economist, right? Because I know I use it a lot. But I'm pretty loath to subscribe to news stuff because I just find myself not going back to those publications that often. I think that we know that people would go back to aBlogtoWatch on a regular basis. I'm just having sort of an open conversation about what's been going on in my mind about it, the hesitations I have. I think what you and I agree on is that 5 or 10 years from now, there will be a watch media and data space. We just don't know what it's going to look like. It'll be there. We just don't know, given technology, changing trends. We don't know what brands people are going to into. There's just a lot of open questions. That makes it exciting, but we know change is constant in that area.
Yeah. I look forward to participating in that change, and hopefully we can talk about it 10 years from now and do a retrospective.
Yeah, absolutely. I realize we're basically almost out of time. Hamza, please tell people where they can learn more about you on the internet and the WatchCharts. I guess it's WatchCharts.com is the website, but where else do you want people to learn about you and the company online?
Sure. So that's the website. And then we also have an Instagram account where you can follow us. That's at WatchCharts. We also have a YouTube channel where we occasionally post videos doing market analysis and answering the kinds of questions around market performance that collectors and enthusiasts may find educational. So that's primarily where we put out content, but really the mothership, the website is the big one.
Check out WatchCharts.com. This has been the Superlative Podcast interview with Hamza Masood. Hamza, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Ariel.